LinkedIn versus reality. When I see someone who's worked in investment banking and management consulting in a short period of time, that is someone that's trying to figure things out. On the surface level, brand after brand, that's fantastic. This guy's killing it. But really what I was doing is I was searching. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And that inflection point, that first one where I had at USC, where I, for the first time, started listening to like what I actually cared about and what I wanted to do, what my interests were, I would really encourage people to do that work sooner. You can plan as much as you can plan, but you never know what's going to happen. Many reasons why people choose investment banking, same reasons for me. Honestly, where it started was I literally asked someone, what is the highest paying job you can get out of college? And this was the one that they said. I did not really know what I was doing. We asked ourselves if we enjoyed doing the work. We were having fun doing the work. The companies, our clients at the time, they were very happy. And so we're like, let's just go all in on this. And that is how HireFrame started.
You've actually got a Harvard MBA. You worked at one of the elite like MBB consulting firms. You have a private equity background, and now you're involved in human development or global talent. Could you talk a little bit about what your approach to your career was? Because not everyone does quite what you've done. Is certainly at the outset. Like what made you set the bar so high for yourself in terms of like those achievements, and what did that mean for you, being like having accomplished that?
Yeah. Happy to go into that background. And if we're starting here, David, maybe I'll just do a little bit of background.
For sure.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm Mike Wu. Today, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called HireFrame. Think like hire and framework, HireFrame.com. We are an overseas staffing firm. Yeah, thank you so much for the compliment about my resume and like LinkedIn profile. I actually have a lot to say about that, like LinkedIn versus reality kind of thing. Like if that were to be a meme, I don't know if it is. It probably is, knowing the internet. But yeah, my background, I've been lucky and I've worked hard for a lot of things. I went to USC undergrad and I studied business there. Had a great experience, and just to walk you through to answer your question about like my career and like my thought process behind that. I'll kind of just share with you. My first job out of USC was investment banking for Merrill Lynch. When I went to USC, I initially went as a political science major, poli-sci, because my mom wanted me to be a lawyer. And so, short story here is, growing up, there's this memory. It's probably one of my earliest memories. I must have been like 5 or 6 years old, and I was in the car with my mom. We lived in South Florida, which at the time, this was like 90s. There was a lot of like development going on, like residential development where we lived. And I saw all the construction workers, the cranes, the tractors. And I told my mom, I was like, I want to be a construction worker when I grow up. And she's like, immediately she looked at me. She's like, no, Michael, you want to be a lawyer. And so, my parents are immigrants from Taiwan. They came to the United States in the 70s, and like a lot of parents, but I think especially immigrants to the United States, they wanted their kids to be doctors and lawyers. So my sisters, they're a lawyer and a doctor, so they followed the path. I was on that path too. I went to USC intending to be a lawyer. I took one semester of classes, maybe like one, and towards that major, and I realized that like I actually am more interested in business. And so, embarrassingly, this is, I think, the first time I really like paid attention to like how I felt and like what I wanted to do. Up to that point, I think I was just very much like following like, what essentially what my older sisters told me was the right thing to do. So that was somewhat of an inflection point. And so I really got into business. I really enjoyed it. And I realized, hey, like looking back, it's something I also enjoyed like prior to college too. I just enjoyed looking at businesses, understanding different jobs and that sort of thing. So why did I choose investment banking out of USC? Many reasons why people choose investment banking, same reasons for me. But honestly, where it started was I literally asked someone that was like a couple years my senior at USC, what is the highest paying job you can get out of college? And this was the one that they said. And it truly is like, this is investment banking known for, high pay for an undergraduate student with no experience, right? It's probably hard to match it in other industries, other jobs. I'm not sure if it's different today. And that was it, because I also was very practical. It's pragmatic. I had a lot of student loans,
Hmm.
um, and other financial responsibilities, and I was mindful of that. And then so I just looked at that and I was like, okay, and am I interested in that? And so I did a quick evaluation of that, and I was like, yeah, I'm pretty interested in this. And who knows where my interests really were, but that was it. And I really focused on getting an investment banking job out of USC. So that's how I started my career. I worked in M&A for Sony after that, like helping Sony acquire businesses, specifically in their television department. I went to business school. I went to HBS, and then after that, I worked in management consulting at BCG, like you alluded to. I will say is like when you look at that, you see what you mentioned is like you use words like elite, or that's what it looks like. When I look at a resume like that today, as someone who looks at a lot of resumes, or when I actually can know what was going on, when I see someone who's worked in investment banking and management consulting in a short period of time, that is someone that's trying to figure things out. Or you can say, if you want to be a little bit more harsh, someone who doesn't know what they are doing, what they want to
Hmm.
do. And so that's really, on the surface level, it's like, man, brand after brand, that's fantastic. This guy's killing it. But really, what I was doing is I was searching. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And look, if you're someone out there that's trying to figure out what you want to do, those are two great places to learn and
Hmm.
figure things out for yourself. Yes, that's a little bit of background of kind of like pre-hire frame, my
Hmm.
career trajectory, and what I was doing, and some of the rationale behind it.
Would you change anything knowing what you know now, or would you do it all over again?
Man, that's hard to say. So my answer is like I wouldn't change anything because I'm very, very happy with where I am today.
Yeah.
When I guess a question that I oftentimes ask myself is like, what would I advise
Yeah. Like, what would
people
you tell
early in
your
their
child?
career to do? Yeah, what would I tell my child to do? I think like I would really like that inflection point, that first one where I had in at USC, where I for the first time started listening to like what I actually cared about and what I wanted to do, what my interests were. I would really encourage people to do that work sooner. Get to work on that.
Hmm.
That's something I kind of just like I didn't even know that was something that you should be doing. It wasn't introduced to me. But it's something luckily figured out. But I would encourage people to do that and kind of find ways to accomplish that before you make a commitment as big as like taking a job somewhere or
Hmm.
investing your time, even if it's just a year in an industry, for example.
And eventually you pivoted into search funds, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that? Like, how did you come across that? And what was that experience like?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for anyone who's listening, like a search fund, essentially what I was trying to do with that and is I was looking to buy a small business, and small, relatively speaking. Like at Merrill Lynch, we were doing acquisitions of billion-dollar companies. Search fund is like you're bringing that to like a very, very small localized level where you're like an individual or maybe a pair of two people, which was my situation. I had a partner going out to find one business, acquire it, and then operate it and grow it. That's the kind of the intent. And yeah, where I actually learned about this was in business schools at HBS. They actually have a class around this. But HBS and Stanford's graduate business school are two of the kind of the original kind of I think like educational institutions that are really sharing this idea with business school students who are oftentimes like hardworking, smart, and ambitious, but not always the startup type. Yes, Stanford, definitely more of the startup type folks are going there. At Harvard, it's a lot of people that are going to be fantastic at growing within an organization and running large organizations. Not necessarily known for a bunch of startup type entrepreneurs. But this was one way to combine someone's entrepreneurial aspirations or interests with the skill set that they might naturally have or they've developed earlier in their career and at HBS, like management, strategy, growth, that sort of thing. And so I learned about that at HBS and I just got really interested in it. Um, and it seemed a little bit, I got interested in it like many things in business school. You learn about so many things. It's a great thing about business school. But then I kind of just put it to the side for a little bit. And I was like, okay, that's cool. That's one of a dozen things that I found interesting that week. And then, yeah, I continued to pursue my career the way I was. I went to BCG And then through that experience at BCG, you're working on like multiple projects for different companies as a consultant. And that's a great experience because you get so many different experiences. And one of my favorite experiences at BCG was where I was working for a large security guard company, multi-international security guard company, but had different branches. So every branch was like its own small business. A branch in Dallas, a branch in Phoenix, a branch in Long Island City. And my job was for that project was literally to go branch by branch, go there physically and try to improve profit margins. So it's very much like running a small business. And so I like that experience. And so I asked myself, like, hey, what does that mean about my like interests and my passions? And it reminded me of the search fund stuff that I learned at HBS. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue that. That's something I want to do. I did also catch the entrepreneurial itch while I was at HBS. You meet a lot of entrepreneurs. You take some courses where they, part of the course is to start a business. And through those experiences, like, this is very interesting. So I ended up wanting to scratch that itch through BCG, learn running a small, like trying to operate a small business, had some challenges that I was interested in working on. And so, decided to do a search fund.
And you didn't acquire your current company through your search fund. What did that moment teach you about risk, timing, and opportunity?
Risk, timing, opportunity. Yeah, I mean, you can't plan for. Yeah, you can plan as much as you can plan, but you never know what's going to happen, right? No, I think there's a good Mike Tyson quote that probably says this better. But I ended up not acquiring companies. So for all intents and purposes, the search was a failure. We didn't find a company. We didn't close on a company. Search is pretty binary. You either acquire a company or you don't, and then you have to run it. But the search stage is pretty cut and dry. My business partner and I, we were looking for a company to acquire. We got pretty far down the line with one company, um, and it didn't work out, which is very common for M&A. Just a million reasons why a deal won't work out, and deals will die a bunch of times before they actually do stick. But during that process, during the search, my business partner and I, we were just taking on consulting engagements on the side. Just think of as side projects to keep the lights on, to pay the bills. Because as we were searching, we didn't have jobs, we didn't have income coming in, so we wanted to create some of that. One of the things that you do with search is like oftentimes a searcher will put aside, make sure they have funds for about a 2-year time period where you are going to be full-time committed to looking for a business. And so you need those funds to stay afloat. One thing I didn't anticipate or I didn't really forecast correctly was the emotional impact that seeing your bank account just declining every day would have on me. I did not like that.
Good
And even though I
motivator.
had planned ahead for this to happen and thought through it,
Mhm.
talked to my girlfriend, but wife now at the time about that, talked with my business partner and his wife about that. When it came down to it, it was very challenging. So what do? We took on some small consulting agents on the side that wouldn't interfere with our day job, our work. And it did pay some bills, but it's really also just like an emotional uplifting just to know we had a little bit of something coming in. And so why I bring up the kind of the side projects we're working on is because HireFrame really came from one of those side projects.
Okay.
We were working on we are doing diligence on different businesses. And through that process, we're also just evaluating different industries. And then one of our friends, he had just raised like a Series A for his fintech company, just classic VC, Silicon Valley play. And we were just catching up, having coffee with him. And he was frustrated. This is 2019. I think the time is important. It's 2019. And in the VC tech world, uh, capital was just flowing freely. And what that meant was companies were hiring a ton, and which meant driving salaries up. And so my friend was frustrated. He was like, "Hey, this thing is crazy. I can't find an executive assistant for less than 100K." And his budget was far below that as an early stage software company. And he was like, "I just no one will even like apply to this job that I've posted." And I was like, "That's wild," but also just very much kind of confirms kind of like the time that we were in at that time. And I was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of like hiring in the Philippines?" It's something that I had heard of at the time. Like I think through Tim Ferriss, actually. He talked about it like way back in the day, 4-hour work week and that sort of thing. But I was like, I was just throwing out the idea. And he's like, yeah, I've heard about it too, but I don't know how to do that. And I was like, he's like, do you know how to do that? I was like, I don't know how to do that. He's like, could you try and figure it out for me? And I was like, sure. All right. So I just downloaded Skype on my phone because I don't think Zoom existed back then. Maybe they did, but it was just Skype. I added my debit card to it, paid for a couple of credits, and I posted a job on Indeed and interviewed I think like 3 or 4 people based in Manila or the Manila area for the job, picked one, and luckily that person worked out. She was phenomenal. She's still at the company today, actually. And because that person worked out, we got lucky there because I did not really know what I was doing. Our friend ended up asking us to do that 2 more times. So he had like 3 people through us.
Mhm.
Great. That's all. My business partner and I would continue to look for a company to acquire. That was our main goal. This was very much a side kind of favor, I would call it. But what happened was over the next couple months, our friend told some of his other founder friends about what he was doing through us. They came to us inbound, and then they said they would pay us to do this work. And we're like, great. That's exactly what we could use is some pocket change where we could work on this in the evenings. Great. And then end of 2019, I think me and my business partner, we lost out on a deal that we really liked. This is the company we were pretty far down the line with. And we were like, moment of reflection. Hey, like, what are we doing? Are we going to gear up for the next year to find a new business, build more deal pipeline? And part of that evaluation was like, hey, we also have these like 5 companies that we've been hiring folks in the Philippines for. Is this it's a business? And we kind of like looked at our deal criteria that we were looking for, our criteria for our business to acquire, and looking at the consulting we were doing on the side, and there was a lot of overlap. So there's a lot of overlap. We asked ourselves if we enjoyed doing the work. We were having fun doing the work, and we were like, hey, like the professionals that we're engaging, that we're hiring, they're having a very good experience with us and the companies they end up working at. The companies, our clients at the time, if you even want to call them that at that point, they were very happy. And so we're like, let's just go. Let's just go all in on this. And that is how HireFrame started.
What gaps do you see in the offshore staffing world?
Ooh, gaps. Yeah, there's got to be many. I'll kind of talk about, for me, it's mostly context gaps. I think that's how I describe them. They're context gaps.
Can you explain
So
that?
yeah, at HireFrame, like I'll give background. There are all around the world, like all companies kind of run the same. There are sales departments, there are marketing departments, there are accounting departments, and that's what makes hiring people in a different country for your company, maybe here in the United States or Canada, possible because there is someone in Manila or Mexico City that studied accounting, worked at an accounting firm, did audit or closed, month end for a company, that they can do that for your company. But there's always there's different contexts, like business in another country. This might sound trite, but it is different than business in a different country, right? Oftentimes, even if it's the same industry, same size business, maybe a lot of firmographics are the same, but this is still the context is different. So I think that's like one thing we noticed for roles, and how that applies to HireFrame is I mentioned our first client was a fintech company, and then all of his founder friends also had like these enterprise software companies. And at the time, this is not too long ago, this is 6 years ago, 2019. The BPO industry had existed for decades. People were hiring large outsourcing companies to do like customer service and data entry and that sort of thing. Whenever you call maybe your credit card, you know that person is probably based in Manila or somewhere in the Philippines. So that existed, but for enterprise software companies, this was actually pretty new. You needed an individual contributor to join your early stage software company, perhaps, or just your enterprise size software company. But this person did not have the benefit of the infrastructure of a BPO, which is usually management, SOPs, where you're on the phone with someone, you can tell they're doing the if this then that kind of thinking. You need someone to stand on their own 2 feet and understand what the objectives of, let's say, a company that's about to go IPO are versus a company that is trying to raise a seed round and truly get product market fit. And so that context has become like very much like a little bit of a focus point for us at HireFrame. Not a little bit, but it is a focus point at HireFrame, where we're training and coaching and educating on the context, because we see that really come out in terms of like performance and outcome. So I think when I say context is missing, I think context is missing because a lot of times when you think of just overseas talent for US companies, there's a lot of ways to get that talent. But I think one thing that's missing is the context that people need to be successful. And yeah,
And there's no free lunch, I've found out the hard way. Sometimes you get attracted by the arbitrage potential and you think, oh, you can hire someone for $4 to $6 an hour here. And then sometimes you get what you pay for. And I noticed that there was a big difference in executive assistants with some of my colleagues. And I asked them, like, how did you find this executive assistant? One answer that stuck with me was they paid almost double what the minimum wage was or the minimum kind of rate. And they focused on the top universities in Manila and just framed the listing in a way that would resonate with the type of person that you would want to work with. And it sounds pretty obvious, certainly to someone like you, but it was just like, oh, I get it. Like, be careful about the message you're putting out, be intentional with what you're looking to hire and think maybe a couple steps ahead instead of just like, oh, I saved a buck. I spoke recently to Athena, which you might have heard about.
yeah,
And they
totally.
have like this, I think it's like a 6-week boot camp or something like that, where they train people. And
Yeah.
now there's Clay and other sorts of AI automation, like agentic approaches that supposedly a solopreneur can have like a team, the impact of a team by leveraging AI. And
Yeah.
one way that Athena's hiring this, like imagine if your executive assistant had like, the power of a company, what that would do for you, et cetera. So they're training their staff and their, I forget what they call them, but their EAs in Clay and some of these other like agentic
Mm,
approaches. Are you doing something similar, or like how are you seeing kind of, let's say the industry, if you will, the executive assistant or offshore talent hiring
yeah.
being kind of like shuffled with AI and some of the other stuff going on these days?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Answer is yes. One story about Athena. Why you mentioned Athena? You're like, do you know them? I'm like, yes, I do, and I just remembered why I know them. Um, There is a yeah. There, I one of my jobs like in high school, I worked at Nordstrom.
I love
I worked
Nordstrom.
at a Nordstrom. Yeah, I love Nordstrom too. It was a great experience. And the head of HR of the store that I worked at in Boca Raton, Florida, was named Carmela, and she essentially hired me and she trained me there. And she popped up on my LinkedIn feed like decade later, or like more than a decade later, and I was like, no way, this is not the same person. And then I clicked into her profile, we chatted, and she works at Athena, so she's on the leadership team there. So pretty, yeah, small, big world, small world kind of moment.
Well
But
done.
yeah, very cool.
I heard about them from the All In podcast. Chamath Palihapitiya was talking about his chief of staff had a leave of absence, and his
Super
friend
cool.
actually and his co-host of the podcast,
Yeah.
Jason Calacanis, I believe,
Huh?
was one of their early investors, and he plugged him in. He said
Yeah.
the EA is like outperforming his chief of staff, and he just totally gave some unsolicited positive feedback live on the podcast.
Yeah. Gotta plug your investments
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, like Athena's, you mentioned they're doing the training, and I think that's exactly what I mean by saying, like, context. They're giving their executive assistants context, I imagine, of what their customers need, whether it's like these 2 guys that you mentioned. So, we do the same thing. One example is, a common role, one of the most common roles actually we staff at the software companies we work with are sales roles.
Okay.
And specifically a role that we call account development rep. It's a BDR that's doing deep research on companies, accounts, and contacts, and manning the digital prospecting on behalf of the sales teams at all these software companies. So secret, like you might be getting an email from Mike at XYZ software company, but it's really they can't do the volume they need to do unless they have someone helping them out. And it's a person and a combination of tools. And as you know, like AI prospecting has gone like wildly out of control. We all receive the emails. And so what's working today is actually like deep human personalization or human touch. And this is actually the first The first role we actually staffed with a non-friend client of ours. So it's someone that was supporting the SDRs and account executives of a software company. And what we learned early on was that we could not find talent in the market, in the different talent markets we were exploring at the time, and take them, place them at a company, and be successful. That is without training.
Mhm.
And so at HireFrame, for this role, and the reason is like enterprise software sales is way different than selling, being in sales for Bell South, like like a old school AT&T
Yeah.
company, which is like you're in the contact center, you're calling, Mary and saying like, "Hey, would you like to upgrade your landline?" So it's a totally different sale. That's B2C. There's also a bunch of people around the world that are fantastic at lead generation, broadly speaking. And we targeted those people at first, to be honest, and we learned that those skill sets actually don't transfer well over to this job, which is like was a interesting takeaway from our interview process, vetting processes. And so we really couldn't find people that had the right skills and experience right away to do this job. But we got really good at finding people with the raw skills and talent to do this job. So instead of finding people with lead generation experience, we were finding people with like academic research experience, as an example, and
Okay.
then providing them with the context of enterprise software sales through a weeks or
Interesting.
months long training program. And then that's where we kind of found a little bit of fire with our clients and specifically in the software sales space.
That's one of the areas you mentioned that business spoke to you earlier. That's one of the areas that it speaks to me. I love like the detective game of trying to figure out the leverage, like what's going to be your kind of your advantage. And there's obviously like many of them, but just like noticing that someone else wasn't quite doing that is really fascinating. On the other side, what should more founders or business owners understand about delegation, especially when scaling across time zones or cultures?
Delegation. Yeah, that's a good one. It's something it's like a delegation is like your glutes. You gotta like, oh, it's not something
That's a good
you
analogy.
work, it's not something you like work out and you're good to go from
Yep,
there on out. It's
yep,
something you always need to work out. You need to keep them fresh, keep them growing. And it's honestly something I find myself struggling with sometimes. But delegation best practices, I'll kind of give you something. I'll just kind of give you my process for delegation that
sure.
I found to work. So I'm doing a task and I do it more than once. And I'm like, okay, if I'm doing this more than once, that means it's taking up some amount of time. And so let me start documenting my process and just so I can learn how I do it because at least for me, it's very hard to first of all identifying that you do something more than once, not the hardest thing. I got that part down. That I've exercised enough to get there, but to be able to articulate what it is that I'm doing, when I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it, that is something I haven't been able to do off the cuff quite yet. I'm not there yet. So my solve for that is this. I will just turn on like a Loom, for example, screen share while I work and do the task. And I do this enough time or I capture enough content, video, and then I'll voice over what I'm doing. And then from there, I'll put that into any LLM like ChatGPT, and it'll help me come up with a process. So before the LLMs existed, I would watch all the content, replay it, Monday morning quarterback, and I'll say like, okay, what are the things that I'm doing over and over again that I can actually systemize and turn into a process? It's very similar to when I took that investment banking job. The way that I learned how to become a proficient investment banking analyst, because I was never the best, but I got okay, was literally you would sit behind a second year analyst that was nice enough to let you sit in their cubicle
Mhm,
and breathe breathe the same air, and you would just watch and you would just see what keys they were touching, what
mhm,
Excel shortcuts were they using, how do they name their files. These like really small things, right? You don't think about,
mhm,
but literally looking over his shoulder. So today, luckily, you don't have to do that. You can just record your screen, capture enough time, and then you can pump that into an LLM and ask it to make some observations about some of the things that you're doing. And it really helps to voice over, kind of talk out loud as you're doing this, because that will tease out some of the probably more nuance, some of the nuance that is definitely there in the work that you do. So that's what I do for delegation. And then I will take that. That's a V1 SOP. I always try to get the V1s of anything as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And then I will ask someone on my team that I want to delegate this to give it a swing. Hey, next time this comes up, I want you to take this. I want you to do the task, and then I will review it, and we'll together and come up with like improvements to the SOP. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how I've delegated like each and everything.
Have you had any moments where trusting a remote hire paid off in unexpected or game-changing ways?
Trusting a remote hire. Um, that's a good question. Interesting question. Remote, and maybe the question around trust is like international. Our whole company, HireFrame, is a remote company, so we have remote team members here in the United States, and around the world. And honestly, I don't think about them differently. Yeah. And so maybe that's a short answer. Yeah, it always pays off to trust my team, and the people that I work with. So yeah, but I think when it comes to building trust,
Mhm.
it's the same way. When someone joins our company day one, I'm not giving them access to everything. You have to earn trust, and usually that's through competency and
Mm.
showing up, and doing the work, being being consistent, and doing a good job. And it's just like anything else. If you were to work at a Subway sandwich shop, like that's how you develop trust. You show up every day,
Mhm.
you're on time, you're getting good at making sandwiches and customer service. And that's how you get trust. That's how you probably get an opportunity to be promoted. Same thing at HireFrame. Doesn't matter that they're remote or if they're in person. It's the same thing. It's showing up every day, getting better at what you do, demonstrating an interest in proficiency in the work that we're doing, and trust kind of builds over time.
Okay, cool. So pivoting from kind of the hiring side, going to the entrepreneur side, what's one of the biggest challenges with scaling HireFrame today, and what would it take to unlock the next level for you?
Ooh, that's a great question. That's a great question. I think one of the big things we're focused on today, you mentioned it, but it's AI. And so a little bit of history like of HireFrame, which is not too long, it's 6 years, but we've seen a lot. We've seen a pandemic. Those were massive
Couple
tailwinds actually for our
elections.
business. Yeah, we've seen a couple elections, and we've seen the introduction, I would call it, to AI.
Yeah.
ChatGPT just a few years ago. And then what happened was that is the application layer to AI, which was called AI SDRs, as an example, or AI insert any kind of job title, right?
Mhm.
And so we've seen that. And AI, AI SDR, probably bad examples. I don't think that's going to be, well, that hasn't been successful yet, I would say. But we do see it's AI is changing work, and it's going to change jobs. It's already happened. And so for us to take HireFrame to the next level, we have to figure out how to position our employees as the human in the loop. So it's going to become, rather than being someone who shows up every day and does the work themselves manually, a more effective team member here at HireFrame and at all of our customers is going to be someone who shows up as an orchestrator of AI technology.
Mhm.
And so that is really what's going to take, I think, our company and probably many companies. I think this isn't unique to HireFrame, to the next level of scale. I'm really excited about this, and it all comes down to this is a new context that we are training on today at HireFrame. It's like how do you use what is the right, call it tech or AI, probably interchangeable today, stack for a insert position at enterprise software company. And so we are in the process of creating that context and filling that context gap.
What's something you had to unlearn after becoming a founder?
Good question. Unlearn. We were talking about earlier if you identify as being someone that's analytical. Maybe I asked that question because I do. I identify as someone who's very analytical. In my past work prior to HireFrame, analytical skills were the most important, probably as a management consultant, as an investment banking analyst. And in those roles at those companies, the bar is extremely high in regards to being right and accurate in your analysis. There is like you hear the class, if a period is off, and if there's spelling is off, if a number, especially if a number is off, there is no room for that type of error. When you're doing analysis, you have to make sure it is so comprehensive that anything thrown at it from a legal standpoint, from a competitive standpoint, it is foolproof. And that is something I had to unlearn because trying to start a business and build it from 0 to 1, get it off the ground, you I've never worked more with incomplete information. And so I had to get really comfortable very quickly making decisions based on very little information.
Mhm.
So unlearning that, let's make this as complete and perfect as possible, and learning how to make decisions with very little information, and truly just trusting my intuition a lot more.
I totally relate. I wouldn't be surprised if many entrepreneurs do. There's an adage, I don't know who to attribute it to, but motion creates data. And I've learned to lean into that and just act and make some mistakes, but you'll learn 10 times from that what you would by sitting on the sidelines waiting for perfection before you enter the ring.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
So that was very different from working for someone else where you can have a cubicle, you can have a title, and things are a little bit more discreet, distinct. And when you're a founder, it's just like the chaos of the cosmos, it feels like.
Totally.
What's one decision that felt risky at the time, but proved critical in hindsight, if any, aside from what you mentioned about pivoting from perhaps search funds into this?
Yeah, just a very critical
Felt
decision that we had to make.
risky at the time, but proved critical in hindsight.
Hmm. Yeah, I will. Yes, I would say it's all around hiring actually for us. For a services company like HireFrame, especially one that's bootstrapping, but also trying to grow, trying to scale
Mm,
aggressively. Cash flow is always something that like you keep an eye out on, especially given
mm,
my background like in finance.
mm,
We've made a couple over the years, like we call them like big hires, where you are taking on a lot of risk in terms of like financial and overhead risk, and on someone that you do your best to vet and you hope they work out. And so it's probably similar to like a e-commerce company like going bigger and buying a new warehouse.
mhm,
They're taking on this new overhead with anticipation of growth. I think those have been like the biggest risks that we've taken. It's always on people. And I think like the risks on people are not just financial, but when you're growing a company and it's small, it's cultural. You're bringing someone on that because of the size of your company, or maybe and their seniority,
mm,
they're going to have an oversized impact on the culture that you're creating. And you want to make sure that they are a good fit and they're going to add in the right ways to the
mhm.
culture. Those have probably been like the biggest risks. Combination of financial, business risk, culture risk. Yeah. And sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't.
I was speaking to a executive coach maybe a month or two back, and I was sharing about some of the challenges I was having with like personal dynamics at different level of business. And he said, "David, you're trying to do the hardest thing there is to do in life, and that is work with other human beings." And I was like, "Yeah, it is pretty complex." And I think that that's part of the feature, like that strengthens us with AI. I think it's amazing, and I think it's a largely expand the pie moment rather than zero sum,
Totally.
but I don't think that we're going to get away with avoiding the challenges of interpersonal dynamics. I think that
No.
that's just going to
It's the
take
beauty of it
on.
too, though.
Yeah,
It's also the beauty of life.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah, and especially business. Yeah, it's the
going
best
back to
part.
the no free lunch
It
comment
can be the
earlier.
best and also the worst part. Yeah, you're right. It's the
Yeah,
hardest, it's the most challenging, but it's also the most rewarding, I find.
agreed. Last question: what does the future of global work look like in 2030?
2030, okay, give me 5 years.
Yep, it might as well be
Yeah.
50 the way things are going. It seems.
Yeah, I think global work is like being a little cute here. I think it's just gonna be work. I think like the word global, like I think what you're alluding to is like, hey, like cross cross-border teams and that sort of thing. And I think that's gonna become, and it already has, I've seen in the past 5 years since we started the business, more and more ubiquitous. It's just normal. It's normalized, which is awesome. But I think it's just gonna become work. No longer are we going to have to um, use the descriptor of like, hey, we're an international staffing firm. It's just gonna be we're a staffing firm,
Right.
and it's a combination of things. But I think it's just like more people are gonna understand how to work with folks in different countries a lot more easily. We've seen that. It's a combination of technology too,
Hmm.
and I think competition as business becomes more and more competitive as it only gets more competitive.
Mhm.
The competition for talent is growing the same way. And
Mhm.
so you have to look globally for strong talent.
I think it will become more transnational. To your point, it already has, but I work in one capacity. I work with some Italians, and sometimes they'll apologize for writing in Italian to each other, and they don't have time to translate. And I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, I got ChatGPT, and it's pretty good. It's
Yeah,
better than Google Translate used to be. And to be fair, Google Translate is probably better now. But you're seeing, what's the name of the, I think it's called Meet In. It's similar to Zoom, and it does real time language translation, almost real
amazing. Yeah,
time. It's like
I love
delayed by
that.
maybe a second.
Yeah, and that's
It,
going to become even
it,
better, like so
exactly,
fast.
exactly.
Someone can speak, and you're going to hear like audibly, like the language that you understand.
Yep,
It's
and
it's
that's the
super cool.
dream. I think because for the next kind of version of our growth. But
Yeah.
real pleasure speaking with you again, Mike. Where can people follow you, and where would you like to point them?
Yeah, yeah. I'm on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to reach out, chat about anything, I always make time for those kind of conversations. It doesn't have to be about HireFrame, obviously, but yeah, just find me Mike Wood on LinkedIn, and yeah, and HireFrame.com.
Great. Thanks for speaking to us today.
David, thanks for having me.